being active in a lot of different communities teaches you a lot of different things, because you see a couple of things in common, or you sometimes pick up things which is like, wait, this was actually quite smart, this was actually quite interesting. So I will talk a little bit, but also give you the question quite a lot, especially in the end, like ask you for input or for ideas. Okay, so yeah, first lesson, it's impossible to make something for everyone, something everyone loves, but that's okay. That ties a little bit into what community in itself is about. A community is always about inclusion, but also always about exclusion. So you can't make something which everybody loves. It will per definition be something which some people don't really care about, don't like, object to, or whatever. But you have to accept that, because you can't really do it otherwise. Okay, communities have different steps. This is like really non-academic, it's just observations from my point of view. All communities have a start. Okay, so you start somewhere. At the beginning, there's often a few people, a lot of creativity, a lot of ideas, a lot of ambition, a lot of like everything is possible. It's a very, very interesting moment. We have different steps later. If the community matures, what happens is that you get routines, and you usually grow. New people come on board, and you have like a phase where the community becomes for real. This is like when it goes from being just an idea in a couple of people's head to actually giving value, to actually having weekly, monthly, or annual meetups or whatever you're doing. Communities almost always also have a transition phase. This can actually be very early. It can also be very late. Transition phase is when either the person or the person starting the community move on. And not all communities survive this phase. A lot of communities can die in this phase. So it's a very delicate phase, moving on from the initiators to actually being something sustainable in one way or another. And I would also say all communities have a dying phase. They all die, I would say, sooner or later. And dying phase is really interesting because you don't really see it when you're in it. It looks very similar to the mature phase. So when you're in the dying phase, you're very seldom aware of it. Or sometimes you are, but then it's really then it's dying for real. Then it's mostly internal conflicts or something like that. But the dying phase is often very similar to the mature phase, but you often have a lack of new people, for example. That's the typical sign of that you're in the dying phase. Everything works, but you don't get new people on board. Then you're dying. You need to change something somehow. Okay, so we start. I've tried to do it a little bit what do you call it? Pedagogisk. Yeah. And so we can start a little bit with the beginning. In the beginning, leadership is very important, as very nicely illustrated in the photo. And as I also see a lot, communities aren't started by a single leader. Sometimes they are. Sometimes it's a single leader, but very often it's a group. Where in that group there is a leader, but it's not the leader that starts the community. It's the group that starts the community. There are a couple of people. There's 3 people, or 5 people, or 10 people, or 20 people sometimes even, who start it. Clear purpose is very good. Having a vision, having something, why are you doing this? That's very good, isn't always needed. You can definitely start a community without a clear purpose, but it makes everything a lot harder. A lot of freedom, very good. The more freedom you have to community members, the better, but isn't needed. You can start a community and be extremely non-tolerant towards anything which isn't the way you like it, and you can still succeed at it, depending on, of course, what kind of members do you want to have, what do you want to achieve. At the beginning, you need to make a couple of choices. One is large group versus specialized. So that choice is how much are we for the depending on how you define it, elite, like how much are you for the nerds or for the really hardcore people, and how much are you for more like the mainstream? How much do you want to bring new people into a scene, or how much do you want to actually just emphasize or make the ones who already understand it even better? And this is often a lot of time I've seen this not being explicit. So the group starts, and after a while, after 1 year or something, there starts to be a discussion, who are we for? What's our purpose? Because in the beginning, the people who draw to the group are most likely in the specialized field. Or if they aren't in the specialized field, they very quickly get into the specialized field because they're a part of a new group which forms. You'll talk a lot about it. You'll get a lot of new friends within your specialization. So it very quickly turns specialized if you don't pronounce anything otherwise. So this is something which you can watch out for. It's very often non-explicit. You can start a community vision-led or buy-in, and this is really interesting. So a vision-led is often started by a leader or a couple of people who say this group would be needed. It's started by somebody who says, well, we don't have a Bitcoin or cryptocurrency meetup. We are 4 people, we should start one. And then you start one and then other people show up. That's vision-led. If you have a buy-in, it's similar, but before you start a group, you actually actively search for everybody who could be interested, talk to them and say like, hi, we are planning to start this group. Would you like to be a member, or would you like to participate? Takes a lot longer time, a lot harder, because in essence you've already decided in your head you want to do it, but you actually have to tell a lot of people you haven't decided yet, because you need to ask them sincerely for the input. But it's really strong, because then suddenly the starting members of this community can actually be very large, and you have a lot more power in that sense. So this is really good, but takes a long time. So very often a community is vision-led. A small group or one person decides we need this and we do it. There's also something to take away. When you start a group, there's a lot of things which aren't pronounced or which nobody really knows. And everybody reads like their own like details into it. So a lot of the rules or a lot of the things who are we for example, is not, it's not explicit. Nobody has really defined it. And everybody will define in their head. They will feel what the group is for themselves at least. So that's, everybody understands it differently. It's important to be aware of that. Because, I mean, this is the reason why when you make a business deal, you have like long contracts where you like actually go through all different things which could happen. When you start a community, you don't do that. You just start. So you never really simulate what could happen in the future, and then you turn into a lot of problems along the way just because you haven't really defined it. But it's hard to define. Nobody will join your community if it's like a long user agreement. Maybe you could have a user agreement, but no one will read it, so it doesn't really matter. So you have to just be aware of it. Okay, I stole this one from Martin LeBlanc. So the name of the community is actually very important. It's really, really, really important because it needs to tell what you're doing. And it's the easiest and best way for outsiders to get into your community. So that the name is, you really need to think about the name, but you also need to remember the name is only important for everybody outside the community. As soon as you're inside the community, it can be called, it doesn't matter what your community is called. So I can start a community called almost anything. If I tell people about it and they understand what it's about, and they agree with what it's about, they will join it, and it doesn't really matter. If the name tells what you're doing and tells who you're for, if you manage to have that, if you manage to have a name which both tells what you're doing and who you're for, then you have a really, really, really good name, I would say. And that's also quite often in smaller communities, that's also the name is something very practical. Founder's House, for example. So, but you have to remember, the problem is that it's very hard to change the name afterwards. It's really, really hard for a group to agree to change the name, even though it's actually completely useless because the name doesn't really matter if you're inside the community. You all know what you're about, doesn't really matter, but for some reason it's really hard for a group to agree on changing a name. But it's really, the group might change what they're actually for after a while, but you will still be stuck with the same name. So yeah, I'm just saying naming, think about it, and it takes a lot of energy. Name is really important, but you have to remember name is only important for the outsiders. So it's sometimes you will get into a discussion in your own community, and when you get into that discussion, try to get people to realize that it's outside perspective which is important, but people don't really see that. Yeah, exactly. That was we already said that, didn't we? Yeah. Sorry, double. Other lessons learned. let actions speak louder than words. That's really important in a community because there's a lot of people in it, and there's a lot of people talking quite a lot about the community. And we'll get back to that soon. So actions are more important. It's more important about doing than about talking. It's no use, and people. The reason this is important is that a lot of people will find their own opinions very important. So they like to express their opinions. That's how we are wired, like in our brain. So, but if you only talk, a lot of people will get annoyed that you're actually not doing what you're about, unless maybe you're like a talking club or something like that. But as soon as you're some other purpose than just talking, then you need to do things. Otherwise, people will leave the community. And it doesn't really help that there's a lot of opinions about what you should do or how you should do it. You need to do it. A good way of doing it is, as Nick also said, make people participate. This is the best advice I can give. And it's really about getting people to do things which are really simple. Just as Nick said, the shares at the beginning, or you're organizing something, ask people to invite friends. Preferably ask them one-on-one if you can. So if you're of a smaller community, if you're not like 300 people, then it's hard to ask people one-on-one. But try to get individuals and give them some kind of assignment, which might be really easy for you anyway. It doesn't really matter, but just give them some kind of assignment to make them contribute more. It might be, can you bring the beer to the next meetup? Or can you take with you some kind of dessert? Or can you find out who we would like to have as a speaker in the future? Stuff like that. The more you can involve people to participate, the better the community will be. Exactly. But it's always this balance, because I've also seen communities which all they do is talk about how should we do it, what should we do, what's our purpose, and then you're back in the no action point and you're useless. So it's a balance. You need to have the balance. You can't have only actions and no talking, and you can't have only talking and no actions. Both are bad. It's a balance.
And you can talk about the balance.
Yeah.
Until the end of the
exactly. And so. And another, but also a balance. Another balance is the inside versus outside. Okay, and this is a little bit about what you also with inside and outside. I mean, who's in the group, who's outside of the group. It's a triangle. Is there a clear line? Is there like a grading, or what is there? And this is important because you always need a way for new members to get into a group. Because as we said before, if you don't have new members, you're a dying group. So that, of course, except if you don't want to have the community anymore or anything like that, then you don't care about new members. But if you want to have a community which is sustainable, you need to have a balance between people coming in and people being in. And this is a balance because you can't have only new people. If you have only new people arriving all the time, your community won't have any of the important things, any of the, as we talked about, any of the storytelling or any of the of the things which make it unique in that sense. But if you only have the insiders and no outsiders, it's really, really hard to have it sustainable at all. The problem is that groups by themselves automatically transform into being an inside only, as a little bit as we talked about in the beginning, the specialization. The longer you're a member of the community, the more specialized you get, the more it becomes your community, the harder it is for outsiders to get into it. So this is something you need to build into the community. You need to think, you need to have thought about how do we make sure we get new people inside. And you need to have some kind of mechanism for that. This is completely different, of course, depending on what you're doing, but you need to have a mechanism for how do we get new members on board systematically in the long run. We just leave it there.
What do you mean by a mechanism?
Yeah?
I mentioned like ceremonies.
Yeah,
or
yeah,
like
yeah.
entrance,
Yeah, so, but no, exactly. For me, a ceremony, like an entrance ceremony, is actually an inside thing. That makes it harder for outsiders to get into, unless that kind of involves getting new people on board also. But like a good mechanism would be having some kind of, you have meetups 5 times a year, and then you tell your community to bring at least one new member a year. That's a mechanism for getting new people on board. Actually, like expressing we need more new people somehow, for example. Or you do advertisement, or you're actively yourself or a couple of people. You could have a subgroup in the community which is about attracting new members. It's about being aware of where are potential members, how do I find them, maybe contact them directly. It's all kind of different things. As I said, it's a balance. How large, and it's about also whom are you for, how large you want to grow, etc. But you need to have mechanisms for getting new people on board. And then this is also a little bit about how do you do things. So when you have a group, I would say there's three different settings of the group. You can have a secret or a community. You can have a secret. That means you don't really talk about it. People don't really know about it. It's not really public in any way. It can be really good. It's really good for making a community feel. So if you have a secret group, you can build a lot of rituals around that indirectly, just because you can do things and it will automatically be perceived as special in that sense. This works if you have a secret group. You really need to think about the inside-outside balance. You can have a secret group, but you really need to make ways for new people to enter the secret group, because the essence of it being a secret makes it so that people won't find it by themselves. The secret could be leadership, could also be the entire group. The entire group could be secret in one way or another. You can have an open group, which is, in one way or another, a group is transparent, especially a community. A community builds with its members, so you often have you have board meetings or you have annual meetings or something like that, which are, in its essence, they're for the members, so they are open in that sense. So there's a natural transparency in that way. Often also for the outsiders. So even if I'm not a member of this community, I can actually see who's in charge in the community, who's part of it, if there's a membership register or something like that. And then you also have actually a third group, which is active transparent. And that's a big difference. And this is especially if you can talk about this both as the entire community or just about the leadership in the community, the ones making the decision. Active transparent is important if you, the difference between those two is that here you say there is information about, or you make the information about who's in charge, what decisions are made public. That's what you're doing here, or to the members at least. Here, you actually spend resources and time talking about why you made the decisions, which decisions were actually made, and etc. So it's not just about being available, it's actually about actively communicating to either the members or the outside, why are we doing things. This is really, really good. Takes a lot of effort. So it's also really, really hard. And which one you should choose here is also very much about who are you for, what's your purpose, etc. So it's all goes back to that. Okay, we've talked about this a little bit before. Daily operations, or maybe not daily, could be weekly, monthly, whatever, like operations. And there's a couple of different things here to think about. One is volunteer versus staff. As we've mentioned, it's about, do you want to create a community which is sustainable? Or, okay, it's not really true. Most people who create a community want to create a community which is sustainable. That means it should work without themselves being present in the long run. Yeah, exactly. So that's why I say maybe not all, because some create a community around themselves and they don't really care about it working without them. However, most people care about that it's not too much work for them, because you can spend a lot of time on a community. So you always want to have some kind of efficiency or some kind of not spending too much time on the community. And most things you can do either by volunteer or by having a staff on it. And of course, this affects a lot on how much membership. For example, if you have a staff, you might have high memberships. Might be possible, it might not be possible. You might require external sponsors or government grants or something like that for that. Both have big drawbacks. Volunteers, big drawbacks, unreliable. People need to be replaced continuously, like either a year, every second year, or every third year, or something like that. And you can't really, performance is as the people who contribute. So it's really hard to get very upset with people for not doing things. You can still do it, but it's harder. Staff is, of course, a lot more reliable. It's depending on who you have as staff. Preferably try to get as good staff as possible. Good tip. And also can last a lot longer. Problem with staff is that often if you're somehow employed to do something in a community, you're very alone. It's very seldom a group of people. It's very often one person being employed. And you have a lot of bosses, usually, like an entire group of people who are your bosses. So it's a very hard job. It's a hard task. A lot of people can't handle it, especially not in the long run. And also a problem that you very often need to rely on external funding in one way or another. Very few groups manage to have staff with their own costs only. So that makes actually, that creates an overhead. It creates a new task suddenly. It creates external relations with sponsors and stuff like that. So suddenly you actually create more work. So you can actually, in worst case, end up in a scenario where you have staff only to have staff. And you actually don't really contribute. You're actually not really doing a lot more than you had before when there was only volunteers. And also another thing, to manage daily operations, it's a little bit in this essence, group versus single person. So if you have a group doing things, or if you have a single person doing most of the things, single person quite often staff. That doesn't have to be. It could also be just a person who is dedicated more time, or says like I'm the leader, or I'm in charge, or something like that. So that's a problematic in this also staff. So staff has often a lot of bosses, very hard, and you also have this here in the group versus single. So if you're doing things on a daily basis, one of the worst things you can do is have like 5 or 10 people, even in the worst case, who are all in charge of what the community does, because then nothing will get done. It's really, really hard. So even if you're volunteer-based, it's really hard. It's really important to make it as much single person as possible. It could be a lot of different people, but then they should have different tasks, different assignments. They should have their own focus area, so that they can make quick decisions in their own thing, and then they can just report to the other members. But as soon as you need a consensus decision to make something happen inside a community, it will just take forever, because everybody's also doing it on their spare time. Really bad. So that balance is really, really hard. And you should also, and this all comes down a little bit to this question. What you should choose and how you should do it is a little bit about how do you make it sustainable? Like, how do you see it in the future? It's no problem making it sustainable with a lot of volunteers, or even just a couple of volunteers organizing all of it. It just needs to be, the advantage is to having thought about it in advance, so that you can actually give people the right expectations when they take a task. That you actually can tell them, good, but you know this will be a lot of work. And if they accept that, then it's fine. But it's a lot harder if you just convince people to do something, then it turns out to be a lot of work, because then there's a big risk that they will stop after a while, and then somebody else has to solve that. And that can tear a community apart. When to exclude, which is also if you're having company, or if you're staying for a while afterwards here, or having company away from here, you should talk about this topic. That's really hard. But building a community, you need to be able to make decision to exclude people, because you will have some people who can ruin it for everybody else, and it's never easy to know. Most of the time, it's if you're Swedish, or if you have and compassionate mentality, which most people have, then I would say if you're thinking about it, then it's most often necessary. So like if the discussion arises, then most often the answer is yes, you need to exclude. So that's like the benchmark, I would say. Okay, and just the last thing is future of communities. And I think we will see a lot more communities arising, just in general, because it's a human longing to be part of a group, and we are no longer in church or something like that, so we are searching for groups. We will see more rituals, I think. We already have rituals, all kind of things like onboarding processes, or welcoming people, or whatever. So don't be afraid of rituals. And I would also say don't be afraid of doing things which might look stupid, but as soon as the group accepts it, it will no longer look stupid. Then people will find it natural. So a group mentality very quickly forms. And also we will see a lot more co-creation. Well, because as we already talked about, it's about getting members involved. And you can see really advanced co-creation. You can see events like Borderland in Denmark, which only exists because there's no leadership, more or less. It's only what people do themselves there. It's completely co-creation. So you can take this a lot further than you probably believe. You probably think asking people to take out the chairs, or asking people to make cake, that's like a hurdle. But I've been to a lot of events where it's like, I haven't done anything. The only thing I say is a time. I don't even say a place. And then the community has to figure out the place, the community has to figure out the food, the community has to figure out everything except when, because I've said that. So like you can take that really long if you would like to. And it's quite interesting just from a social experiment. Cool. And yeah, I just wanted to talk again, these are the different stages. I put them there in case you had some new ideas and you think, where could this fit in, etc. I don't really know. Otherwise, I would just like to say thanks. Cool.